I am a meta-human, the next generation of digital human powered by Unreal Engine.
Operations of tunnels that were supposedly to that point unexplored. Gantenberg's cache being but one example of these mysterious finds, deep within the tunnel systems in the royal chamber, at a 90-degree turn going vertically upwards, a pile of papers, possibly wrapped artifacts, weighed down with a small piece of timber or stone, possibly another artifact, was discovered by Gantenberg's robot. Also, during initial location attempts to find access tunnels leading to the Queen's chamber, several blocking stones required removal. After the removal of the seventh block, a modern-era hexagonal steel rods were discovered discarded upon the tunnel's floor. Each section of the hexagonal steel rods measures 2.7 meters in length and was fitted with a round socket, which allowed them to be joined to the next section. In one of the lower shafts in 1872, Wayman Dixon found 3 more objects which could be considered proof of prior covert exploration of the mysterious northern shafts. A copper grappling hook, about 5 centimeters in length, accompanied by a small gray-green stone ball, and a broken-off piece of a square wooden slat or rod, about 13 centimeters long. The wood would today be the most intriguing of his finds. These artifacts, suspected to be remnants of the grave robbers' tools, could have been carbon dated, yet this fragment is the only one of the 3 to now be missing out of the London Museum's collection. Unfortunately, in his writings, Dixon doesn't say in which of the 2 lower shafts he actually found the objects, but he mentions them in connection with the northern one. Not only did these obviously highly intelligent people leave evidence of how they must have gotten in, but also traces upon the previous untouched ancient walls of the shafts within geodes, clearly left by their previous robotic technologies. Other square metal rods have been recovered, along with other artifacts discarded within some tunnel systems deep within the ancient structures, meaning these guys got to the treasures way before we did. Interestingly, reported evidence of covert excavations continues to this day. Heavy-duty electrical supplies discreetly running into and trailing deep into the pyramids have been noticed and photographed by some of the more astute tourists. Witnesses to the sounds of heavy machinery being used beneath the site is also frequently reported, yet rarely followed up. It seems it's not a question of whether brilliant minds have achieved the seemingly impossible in penetrating these secret layers, but more a question of how and what astonishing finds have possibly been kept concealed. As one would come to realize, while traversing such fields of research as we do, you will inevitably come face to face with a worthy adversary. That foe, of course, is modern paradigm. Often scoffed at when discussing the possible existence of a highly trained, highly secret group of worldwide individuals who are tasked with the protection of a profitable lie. Often labeled a conspiracy theorist due to the vast array of missing evidence and stolen relics. Yet, alas, regardless of this, we feel it is our duty to vindicate all those who have suffered for doing nothing more than tell the truth. Let's start with a familiar friend, the Great Sphinx. In 1993, NBC aired a show titled The Mysteries of the Sphinx. During the show, geological evidence was shown, which indicated that the Sphinx was vastly older than Egyptologists currently claim. This evidence has subsequently become popularly known as the water erosion controversy. The self-taught Egyptologist John Anthony West first brought the evidence to the attention of geologist Dr. Robert Shaw. Now, after thoroughly studying the Sphinx firsthand, numerous geologists share West's conclusions, and many have announced their findings to the world. Dr. Zawi Hawass, along with the Egyptian antiquities, had launched a barrage of public criticism at this new evidence. Renowned Egyptologist Dr. Mark Lehner, who is regarded as the world's foremost expert on the Sphinx, also joined this attack, publicly declaring West and Shah as ignorant and insensitive. The smear campaign was ultimately a success and squashed any further exploration of the theory. This, regardless of the overwhelming evidence supporting their claims, and this intellectual mudslinging is unfortunately quite common. The case of author Michael Cremo could be seen as a well-documented example of this, and it also exposes just how the scientific establishment openly uses pressure tactics on the media and government to stifle historical truths. In Michael's book, Forbidden Archaeology, he examines many artifacts that prove modern man's antiquity far exceeds the age currently accepted by academia. In 1996, when NBC broadcasted a special program called The Mysterious Origins of Man, they covered material from Cremo's book. The reaction from the scientific community could be seen as verging on ridiculous. NBC was deluged with letters from furious scientists and others within certain fields, who all called the producer a fraud and the whole program a hoax, even attempting to force NBC to not rebroadcast the popular program ever again. They went to the tremendous effort of presenting a case to the federal government, requesting that the Federal Communications Commission step in and bar NBC from airing the program again. This was not only an apparent infringement of free speech and a blatant attempt to thwart commerce, but up to that point, it was an unprecedented effort to censor intellectual discourse. Dr. Virginia Steen McIntyre would also feel the cold hands of conspiracy. A geologist working for the U.S. Geological Survey, she was dispatched to an archaeological site in Mexico with the task of dating a group of artifacts. This particular case, again, perfectly illustrates just how far this elusive establishment is willing to go to guard orthodox tenets. McIntyre used state-of-the-art equipment to date the relics, but her results were off the charts. The lead archaeologist expected a date of 25,000 years or less, yet she found dates of 250,000 years or more on multiple occasions. A dating of 25,000 years is conveniently critical to the Bering Strait crossing theory. Once her results were realized, the head archaeologist decided to dispose of Steen McIntyre's results. She has since found it hard to get her papers published, and she has also lost a teaching job at an American university. These sorts of scenarios from these particular types of people is what drives us to expose the truth. No one should lose their career because they are doing it correctly. Unfortunately, however, unless there is a dramatic shift within our own society, stories such as these are likely to continue.
That I believe.
I will push you. I will test you. I'll demand everything you've got. What do you get? Everything I have.
My name's Dan Snow, and I'll tell you about History Hit TV. It's like Netflix for history. Hundreds of exclusive documentaries and interviews with the world's best historians. We've got an exclusive offer available to fans of Timeline. If you go to History Hit TV, you can have information on History Hit TV. You can check it out. In the meantime, enjoy the video.
In 1763, Britain defeated France in the battle for North America and claimed the continent for their empire. However, France's Ottawa allies were unbeaten, and they would meet any threat to their homeland with force. Conquer, surrender, victory, defeat. These deadly battles shaped coins. These are nations at war. Ever since their arrival in the 17th century, the empires of Europe had spent decades fighting the First Nations and each other for supremacy over North America. As kings and queens fought epic battles to draw lines on a map, indigenous peoples and European settlers burned each other's homes, locked in a near constant life and death struggle for the land itself. By the 1750s, decades of hostility had taken its toll on indigenous North America. Even nations like the Ottawa, who lived outside the main theaters of battle, had suffered. For generations, they had controlled the territory around the Great Lakes with their fellow Anishinaabe, the Ojibwe, and the Potawatomi. Together, their homelands formed one of the richest hunting grounds in North America and the gateway to the West. It was a hunter's paradise, which the Ottawa were willing to protect with force. To France, the Ottawa's position made them attractive allies. And in 1701, they built a fort at present-day Detroit to facilitate trade and cooperation. It was called Pontchartrain de Detroit.
Fort Pontchartrain de Detroit was built as a key fort that could control the trade networks. It sat on a very specific geographical and strategic spot.
The Ottawa's economy was bound to the French fur trade, as was their access to steel weapons, firearms, and ammunition. These weapons had defended the Ottawa from hostile nations for over 100 years. But the price of doing business with the French was an alliance against their ancient enemy, Great Britain. When fighting broke out in 1754, Ottawa chiefs were quick to answer France's call to arms. These warriors fought valiantly on the front line of many battles, but their courage could not save New France from occupation. The news of France's total defeat only reached the Ottawa in the fall of 1760, when a force of American Rangers under Robert Rogers were intercepted by Ottawa warriors along the shores of Lake Erie. The chief leading this party would soon become one of the most famous indigenous leaders in North American history, Chief Pontiac. Though the details of his life remain shrouded by rumors and propaganda, by the 1750s, Pontiac was the key Ottawa leader around Detroit. Luckily for Rogers, he hadn't come to fight. The Ranger was there to ask for peace. It was through Rogers that Pontiac learned how complete France's defeat in North America had been. When Rogers took Detroit without firing a shot, Pontiac knew he had to prepare for life without the French.
The Anishinaabe, after the 7 Years' War, continued to wonder whether or not they could trust the English. After all, we had been at war with them for 7 years.
The problem now is the French were gone. And the only empire that they were going to be dealing with was the British.
Pontiac had good reason to fear the new status quo, because the man chosen to pacify Britain's occupied territories would threaten everything Pontiac held dear. Geoffrey Amherst had been sent to North America during the height of the 7 Years' War, at a time when Great Britain was losing the battle for the continent.
Geoffrey Amherst was a very
controversial man in his time and continues to be a controversial character even in the 21st century. In 1759, Amherst and his subordinates unleashed a three-pronged offensive which reversed the course of the war. They swiftly overran New France's frontier forts and took the colonial capital of Quebec. When Amherst took Montreal in 1760, France's war was over. However, their Ottawa allies still had the strength to resist. While Amherst was an efficient military commander, he was a terrible choice to oversee the post-war occupation of New France. Amherst considered the First Nations inherently treacherous, and he was determined to treat nations like the Ottawa as conquered subjects of the British Empire.
Jeffrey Amherst despised First Nations because he was a product of his time. What I mean by that is he held the prejudicial and racial beliefs of many people of Anglo-Saxon heritage.
His first actions was banning the sale of guns and ammunition to French Canadians and indigenous people. The Ottawa had used muskets for hunting and warfare for over a century. Denying them access to ammunition threatened their survival. The English became the only superpower. The way they kept that status was to ensure that all the native nations were they kept so reliant on trade goods that they really had lost their people. Pontiac decided not to wait until his people were too weak to fight back. In 1762, he sent warriors to rally as many troops and warriors as he could to a secret meeting in Detroit, where Pontiac forced armed resistance movement. His supporters included Ottawa, Ojibwe, Potawatomi, Wendat, Miami, and the multi-ethnic Wabash Confederacy. And Pontiac wasn't alone in his opposition to Britain. In the Ohio country, warriors from Lenape, Shawnee, Mingo, and Seneca rallied around a chief named Gayasuta. Gayasuta had fought against the British during the 7 Years' War. Now, he feared losing his people's land to American settlers. When the British began building outposts on land which belonged to Pontiac and Gayasuta's supporters, all of their fears were vindicated. If Jeffrey Amherst had hoped to intimidate the Ottawa into submission, he made a grave mistake. And Pontiac would make him pay for it. British generals
The indigenous groups that were once allied to the
Amherst had been warned against his aggressive approach to diplomacy by Britain.
Who's hiding in the bushes? Little creeper, you little bastard.
they're not your slaves, these lakes, these woods, these mountains were left to us by our ancestors. They had and we respect But the garrison had been warned of Pontiac's intentions. After facing heavy resistance, his warriors were forced to retreat. Pontiac's his actions served as a rallying cry for all those who had grown tired of Britain's the survivors of this battle fled to Fort Sandusky, only to find it already destroyed by the Overworld. By the time Chief Guy moved against Fort Pitt in July, 8 British strongholds had been taken. As the forts fell, raiding troops descended on unprotected British settlements. An estimated 2,000 civilians were killed. And Pontiac's warriors kept the American frontier on fire. Jeffrey Amherst had been warned not to provoke the First Nations. Now he faced a war his army wasn't ready to fight. The British army was not prepared to fight a war against Pontiac in the wilderness. Driven by hatred and desperation, Amherst would resort to any means necessary to restore British life, even if it meant unleashing weapons of destruction. Summer of 1763, in the Great Lakes region, the British Empire was under assault. Their forts had been burned by warriors and supposedly conquered nations. Detroit, Chief Pontiac has the garrison trapped, but his army is in a dangerous position. In this context, that mobility is the key to victory. But Pontiac was stuck in a set of sea, and he lacked the two things necessary to succeed: supplies and artillery. For each day he sat outside Detroit's walls, Pontiac lost supporters. And after some time you go on the attack. You can't sustain a defensive position forever. The First Nations coalitions also faced a looming counterattack. 250 soldiers under Captain Belial and Pontiac's old acquaintance, Robert Rogers. While at the same time, another 500 men under Henry moved against Guy's army outside Fort Pitt. Amherst had even given Bouquet some of the deadliest soldiers in the British Army. The Highlanders, regiments like the Black Watch, had been raised to pacify the clans of northern Scotland. By the 1750s, Highland units became feared as shock troops, recruited from some of the toughest and most desperate people in the British Isles. Like their ancestors had for generations, the Highlanders carried swords into battle. These hilted blades were perfect for slashing and stabbing, while the hilt and pommel could crack an enemy's skull. Equally deadly with the Bane, Highlanders were the only British units truly prepared for close combat. However, these elite soldiers weren't enough for Jeffrey Amherst. He planned to win at any cost. Smallpox had killed millions of indigenous people not long after first contact with Europeans. Now, Amherst and his commanders considered using it as a weapon. At Fort Pitt, the British gave pox-ridden blankets to one of Guy Souta's peace envoys, hoping it would spread and wipe Standards of warfare, he would definitely be considered a war criminal. The biological attack killed countless people, but it didn't break Gaius to siege. It would be up to the British Army to end the war. Unfortunately for the British, Pontiac and Gaius knew their enemy was coming. On July 31st, the British called on attacked Pontiac. They ambushed the British column at a place now called Bushy Run. However, this time, the British didn't retreat. Bouquet's men held their ground until nightfall. By daybreak, the fighting resumed at a fevered pitch. Every time the British advanced, the scattered and breached, so Bouquet laid a trap by deliberately weakening a portion of his line. Convinced that the British were retreating, Gaius orders to charge However, Amherst's victory on the battlefield would be undercut by a political issue. While Amherst was busy provoking a war, Sir William Johnson had complained about his conduct to London. As Britain's top diplomat to the First Nations, his word carried weight. Amherst was recalled to London. He tried to save face by honoring him for his service to them. He was quietly removed from command. His replacement, Thomas Gage, wasn't much better. But he did see the value in letting Johnson negotiate peace. As 1764 began, Gage sent new expeditions into the West with one mission: convince the First Nations to surrender or destroy their means of continuing the war. However, his opponents had learned their lesson from Bushy Run. They avoided open battle, targeted vulnerable outposts, and settlements instead.
They're not.
And he was losing ground by the day. When Gage and Johnson convinced the Seneca to switch sides, the coalition in the Ohio shattered. Realizing further fighting was hopeless, Gaius surrendered by October of 1764, taking the Ohio country nations out of war. While Pontiac remained undefeated, he was short on supplies and ammunition. News of Gaius' surrender struck a mortal blow to the coalition. The Potawatomi, Wendat, Squatter, and Miami made separate peaces with Johnson. In 1765, only scattered pockets of Overworld and Virginia were still left. Pontiac abandoned his siege and brought his renewed supporters deep into the wilderness. Pontiac's ruin was no longer achieved. The British had no hope down in his old land. Pontiac held out for another year before he agreed to the British. At Fort Ontario, finally ended the conflict against the wall. As a sympathetic hero. Though Pontiac's orders failed to permanently end British settlement, they had taught the Crown a very bloody lesson. The First Nations would not meekly roll over and let Britain push them aside.
itself is obviously a colonial assertion, because it doesn't say that the crown respects in a nation-to-nation relationship.
The lands west of the Appalachian Mountains would be off limits to American settlers. It was hoped this gesture would prevent another leader like Pontiac from emerging. The borders of this artificial indigenous homeland were sketched out in Europe without input from the First Nations. The British even gave this territory a name: the Indian Reserve. America was a battleground, and the Abenaki Nation are fighting for survival. They are caught between two rival empires. One is an enemy seeking their destruction. The other, an ally fighting a war they don't understand. Conquer, surrender, victory, defeat. These deadly battles change careers. These are nations at war. For much of its history, Eastern North America was a land where the borders and fates of nations were decided in combat. From skirmishes over grudges and resources to the decimation of cultures in the name of territory or wealth. The landscape itself serves as a monument to the countless who lay buried and forgotten. One conflict, however, stands out for the way it changed the fate of the First Nations forever. The 7 Years' War, a conflict which began as a dispute between France and Britain over the Ohio country in 1754, became a global war fought by all of Europe's major powers. Caught between these clashing titans, indigenous nations like the Abenaki fought for themselves. Abenaki territory formed the western frontier of what they called Wabanaki. Roughly translated as the Dawn Land, it referred to not just the land itself, but the people as well. The Dawn Land is home to 5 nations connected by trade, marriage, and related languages. Together they formed a military alliance known as the Wabanaki Confederacy. The Abenaki were one of the first indigenous nations to trade and work with Europeans. North of Abenaki territory were Montreal and Quebec, the fortified heart of a French colony called Canada.
Damn it.
While on the east, the Mekong, Malazan, and French built a hybrid society known as Acadia. Though the French made grandiose claims of authority over the Abenaki, the colonial officials knew the truth. The French needed the Abenaki to guard the core of their territory from 2 dangerous rivals, the Iroquois Confederacy and Britain's American colonies.
There we go.
The Abenaki are effectively settled along the border between New France and the expanded territory of the 5 nations Iroquois. Thus, the Abenaki play a role as sort of frontline soldiers, frontline warriors against this expanding territorial empire.
French traders and diplomats worked hard to win Abenaki allies, lavishing their chiefs with gifts and arming their warriors with guns and steel. Making the Abenaki even tighter to the French alliance was the presence of the Jesuits. This arm of the Catholic Church lived among the Abenaki, building missions and settlements.
The Jesuits were very much at the forefront of expanding the French Empire because of their mission to bring the word of God to the native people who had been in that religion.
The Jesuits served as France's middleman and intelligence intelligence agents among the First Nations. Although the Abenaki undoubtedly benefited from the traders and priests, their presence came at an unforeseen price. Before European contact, there were an estimated 30 to 40,000. By 1754, however, European diseases and wars had reduced their population by as much as 85%.
They were not a large nation, large people to start with, and then they got smaller and smaller until there was very, very few of them remaining.
The Abenaki were now forced to rely heavily on their allies. In the name of keeping the alliance strong, they feigned respect for France's imperial pretensions and stroked their egos by calling him father. There was a sign of respect. Many Frenchmen mistook this initiative. Despite their differences with French, the Abenaki had close ties with the French Canadians, never more than 100,000 in number, that worked and hunted alongside the Abenaki. French Canadians learned to fight as their First Nations allies did, and became feared as guerrilla fighters in their own right. Both peoples suffered at the hands of the British and their Iroquois allies. As 1754 began, both stood to lose everything to British expansion. The final showdown between Britain and France had begun, and the Abenaki would have to fight for everything they held dear. It's 1754, and battles are raging across eastern North America. Though there has been no formal declaration, France and Great Britain are at war. And the Abenaki are caught in the crossfire. The conflict began in May of 1754, after a minor skirmish at a place called Chemonville Glen.
Into the mid-18th century, the competition is so fierce over North America that something as small as a little skirmish transmits back across the ocean into London, into Paris, into these capitals, and immediately calls for a response and reaction.
There would be no negotiations, no diplomatic solution. North America's fate would be decided at the muzzle of the gun. Canada's governor, the Marquis de Beauvoir, faced a giant. The American colony had a population of 1 million, while Canada had just 60,000. Beauvoir's situation wasn't hopeless. He controlled a string of forts and outposts from the St. Lawrence to Mackinac Island. Defending this ground were 3,000 French Marines, colonial troops who were skilled in both indigenous and European tactics. Their standard weapon was the 1728 model of the Charbonneau musket. This 69 caliber flintlock was lighter than the British Brown bess and more accurate. However, Beauvoir didn't have enough of these professionals to guard the entire frontier. He was having to rely on the Canadian militia to do much of the fighting. A Canadian himself, Beauvoir knew how deadly the militia could be if First Nations warriors fought with them. The Abenaki warriors moved fast, trained light, hit hard. Together, the Abenaki and the French Canadians launched raids along the American frontier. For the Abenaki, this was a war of survival, and they refused any retreat.
The settlers felt that at any time they could be attacked. And the raiders a lot of times were ruthless. They just basically killed men, women, and children, and it was mutilation, scalping, burned everything to the ground.
By February 1755, the indigenous French coalition received reinforcements. 6 battalions under Baron Dieskau to stiffen New France's defenses. These troops arrived just in time to finish the
Oh shit.
The third attack came in August, when 1,700 American and Mohawk volunteers on their way towards Fort St. Frederick marched towards Lake George. The British invasion began to unravel almost immediately when their commanders tried to employ European tactics on a North American battle.
The problem was that there was wilderness. So there were cases where in jungles they would have to hack trails, which is impossible. So they would follow what's called moving trails, and they ended up simplifying.
The Ohio expedition under General Grant was utterly destroyed and locked into an ambush near the Monongahela. The assault on Mont Saint Jour succeeded only because the Royal Navy allowed the British to avoid the treacherous overland route. Baron Dieskau and his French grenadiers would deal with the third invasion personally, joined by Canadian militia, French troops, Allied Mohawks, and Abenaki warriors. On September 8th, the warriors and militia ambushed an enemy reconnaissance force. But the British were able to escape into their camp and dig in for an attack. When Dieskau ordered a frontal assault on the enemy lines, the Abenaki and Mohawk refused. The Canadian militia followed their lead. Dieskau charged anyway. He and his 200 Frenchmen were swiftly defeated. New France's top military officer was now a prisoner of war. Dieskau had misunderstood his power over the Abenaki. Their warriors may fight alongside the French, but they were not theirs to command. Even when they won the battle, the British force was too weak to advance. Instead, they built Fort William Henry just across the lake from the French fort Carillon. By 1756, France was winning the war for North America, and indigenous allies like the Abenaki had made this success possible. In their hour of triumph, France made a crucial choice, which decided the course of the war. They appointed a new commander-in-chief, a dashing general who didn't understand the war he was fighting. It's 1756, and the struggle for North America is going in France's favor. They had assembled a coalition of allies, like the Abenaki, to stop the British offensive of 1755. Then, it was trapped. Governor Old knew this result was only possible thanks to allies like that. Unfortunately, Old was not the only man responsible for New France's defense. Authority over the French treasury belonged to Louis Joseph Marquis de Montcalm.
Montcalm was a pivotal figure in the history of New France.
Montcalm was a veteran brigadier general seasoned on the fields of Europe. His arrival in New France was a sign of just how serious this conflict had become. This North American conflict had now spread to Europe. With France distracted, the vicious kingdom of Prussia occupied neighboring Saxony. This aggression provoked a response from France, Austria, Sweden, Spain, Russia, and Britain and Prussia were forced into an alliance, which also included Portugal and a few German states. Even the Mughal Empire became involved, joining forces with France to attack the East India Company colonies. The Abenaki nation was a truly global conflict in history, and the French allies began fighting amongst themselves. Montcalm was a classically trained European field officer who envisioned a war of siege and open battles, while Governor Old was a Canadian who believed guerrilla tactics were their only hope for survival. Montcalm ignored him. That May, he moved against Fort Oswego to prove his strategy the correct one. Among the 1,800 warriors who joined him were 300 Abenaki. As his allies watched, decided to ransom prisoners. The general was deeply offended by his allies' behavior. For the Abenaki, plundering or taking captives was a normal part of warfare. Montcalm, however, saw the evidence of their barbarism. A gulf had formed between the French and their allies, right when France needed them the most. France was facing a war on multiple fronts. Defending the Canadian colonies was not their top priority. The French government had the opposite idea. Beginning in 1757, they focused on taking France's colonies, already fixed for the eventual peace negotiations. The British government was devoting more and more resources to making sure that they won the war in North America. The French crown lost the Roman of his life. Turned its attention to North America. It was able to stop the French reinforcements and supplies. It was able to continue sending reinforcements and supplies to its own forces and its own citizens in the region. It was the Navy that basically blocked the French from improving their position in North America. Once the English had brought sea power to the conflict, they successfully created this blockade so that France could not supply its colonies anymore. Despite British naval success, Montcalm was still winning the land war in North America. On August 3rd, he pressed his luck and attacked Fort William Henry. Just like at Oswego, Montcalm's forces built trenches and gun batteries, trapping the fort in a crossfire. The garrison fought bravely, but after 6 days, no relief army came. The fort's commander decided to surrender.
The Battle of Fort William Henry was a key turning point in the war because it was a crucial victory for the French. The fort was held by the British and was positioned at the very southern end of what is famously known as the Champlain Corridor. Now, the Champlain Corridor is effectively this network of rivers and lakes that allows someone to invade enemy territory on a north-south axis. It is effectively a natural highway. So with the British controlling Fort William Henry, they could strike northwards into New France. But when the French captured it in 1757, they thus blocked the British from using this natural invasion highway.
To the aristocratic Montcalm, the defenders of Fort William Henry had fought with courage and deserved his respect. So he let them march away with their lives and honor intact. It was a slap in the face to his Abenaki allies. The coalition army had the enemy at their mercy, but Montcalm had allowed them to walk away. The Abenaki and other warriors descended on the rear of the British colony. The death toll remains hotly debated, but at least 100 were likely killed. Hundreds more were taken as captives.
It was called the Massacre at Fort William Henry. And what this did is this stirred up so much public opinion in Britain that they started to demand their government take more of a focus and devote more resources to North America. So what's fascinating is even though it was a French victory, in the long term, it actually played against the French.
The Abenaki and the other warriors had openly ignored Montcalm's authority. The falling out between the allies could not have come at a worse time. The British counterattack had already begun. On July 26th, Louisburg was captured by British forces, opening the city door to a British advance.